Have you ever wondered how to make assessments more meaningful for the students and more manageable for yourself as the teacher? Today's guest was asking those questions and found the answer in student driven assessments. Keep listening to learn more about Angela's practical solutions to this common challenge. Welcome to Pass the Baton, Empowering Students in Music Education. Here, we amplify the voices of music teachers around the world who are passing the baton and creating environments where the music students are empowered. Together, we can help students transform from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. I'm Catherine Finch.
And I'm Teresa Hoover. We are so glad that you're joining us today.
Yeah.
So Catherine, how you doing?
I am in the ending stretch for spring break. And before spring break, my kindergarten sings. So I know I had talked a little bit earlier about like it was time to get started and to ask them some questions about what they want to present to their parents. And now we are at the very end. We've performed for our buddy classes. Because it was our first experience really as kindergarten, as the first experience as having an audience at our school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I have to say, inviting the buddy classes was great because they're so excited for the buddy class to come. So buddy class is just like, another class in the school they pair up for like reading or they pair up to do a fun activity, a craft or something.
So these are older students?
Typically it's older students with younger students. Yeah.
Okay.
So my kindergarten friends had mostly their buddy classes were a third grade class. One group had a second grade class.
Okay.
But so yeah, it's a nice little difference. Yeah. They get to do special things with their buddies. And so when they get to do something, when like I invite them, it's very exciting. So, and the lovely thing I think that I just kind of happened upon was I asked the third graders, you have a couple of performances at Meadowbrook under your belt. What advice do you have? And they gave the sweetest advice, like, it's okay to be nervous and you'll feel better in practice. And then at the end, I asked their buddies to give us some feedback for our performance this coming week. What's something that we did really well that we need to make sure we do for our parents? And they came up with wonderful things as well. Like the buddy classes were the best. They said things like, you were so quiet with your quiet signal for after playing your instruments. Do that for your parents. Or, you were so focused and didn't talk between songs, so you knew what to do. Do that for your parents. So it was it was great, in fact, when I told the buddy class that their kindergarten buddies had created from beginning to end the program, with the only thing that we had to do something that we've been doing in music class this year. I had a couple kids like, oh, like almost not gasp, but like, so it was just all in general, a really nice experience. And I think a nice bit of feedback for those kindergartners before this week. Yeah. So here we are.
That's really neat. And, I don't know whether this was an intentional segue or not, but that I feel like it really relates to what our guest today had to talk about, right? Because we had this wonderful interview with Angela Harman, and she was talking about this idea of student directed and even peer informed feedback and assessment. Just how valuable that is, and that's really exactly what I'm hearing you say with your kindergarten to third grade friends, right?
Yeah. And again, I think this is the first year I think I've had time / made an effort to have their classes come, but I think it's a definite keep because it was so, I think helpful to hear from those beloved older buddies, some really good feedback, So
and what a great opportunity for those older, those third grade students to be able to think of themselves as like, I have something valuable to offer. Like that's huge for these kids.
Yeah.
So,
and it was really sweet to see how much they took it so seriously. Like they were really pleased to be able to share their expertise. So it was sweet.
I love it.
So,
yeah.
But
so then looking, thinking about the interview we just did, Angela was talking about the value of really putting the assessment back in the student's hands, right? And using it as a tool for growth and as a tool for progress. kind of de-emphasizing the grade, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah. Not a summative thing, but more of like happening often and helping them, and helping her plan for her instruction by the feedback she gets from her students.
Right. I just appreciated how everything was very practical and actionable, and also had direct ties to student growth.
Yeah.
We talked about it in the episode. How often do we give an assessment or some kind of test to students, and they do the thing and then they're done the thing and they move on with their lives, right?
Yeah.
And we wonder like how beneficial was that? Was that a meaningful experience, or did that just give me something to write in my grade book?
Yeah.
Whereas her version, it sounds like a very meaningful experience.
And she addressed the teacher side. What is manageable for me? Yes. Which is huge, right? Like we're killing ourselves on these assessments, but if they're not working for us either, like it's got to be for everybody, for sure.
Yep. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get to the interview with Angela, just remember that we do have show notes, and where there's a couple of links, especially links that she provided, so things that you're going to want to check out of Angela's, as long as some pass the baton links. You'll find them in the podcast player, or you could even find them if we're watching on YouTube directly below this video. So check those out. We ask this every week. We're not going to stop asking it anytime soon. If you have not already subscribed or followed or liked, or whatever the thing is in your listening platform of choice, please do that. That makes sure that you don't ever miss any episodes. And reviews are super helpful, both like the rating and then the comments, the feedback you can leave. So we would greatly appreciate any of that if you can.
Yeah. And we have the Buy Me a Coffee site. For less than a cup of coffee, you can send us a support and help us with podcast hosting fees and other expenses.
Yeah. And honestly, that Buy Me a Coffee has value to you as well. So make sure you check out the Coffee Club membership, right?
For sure.
Just kind of, there's some little perks. We're not going to just, there's definitely things that are going to help you. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Let's take it away. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are super excited to be joined today by Angela Harman. Angela, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I was saying before we started that it's really neat because I have been following your work for years. You are one of the many people who helped me get started teaching orchestra as a band person. So it was really wonderful to see, the various things that you've been doing and how you're you're talking more about student ownership and things like that. So we're very excited. I guess before we get started, can you maybe introduce yourself? Tell us about your background. What are you up to in music education these days?
Sure. So my background, I started playing the violin as a kid in the school system. So I know there are lots of students who started, that I was playing in orchestra with, who were those Suzuki kids who started at a really young age. And I really wasn't introduced to music and violin until those recruiting shows that the school orchestra and band would go around and do. And I really chose orchestra because my friend wanted to do violin. So I did it with her. But really that was the start for me. And so the school orchestra was always a huge part of my music education. And I never really envisioned going on and being a teacher. I didn't think I would go that route. But when I got to college and I was looking into things, I'd spent a little bit of time in a classroom. And as soon as I set foot in a choir classroom for just a few minutes and saw what was going on, I got to teach for just a 1-minute lesson, and I was just absolutely hooked. So I got my degree here in Utah, and I've been teaching orchestra in the same district here for about 15 years.
Wow. That's nice. That's awesome. And what exactly do you teach now? What level of orchestra?
I teach middle school orchestra. At our middle school, there are only 2 grades. There's 6th grade and 7th grade, which is kind of different because I know a lot of schools have more grades than that. Ours is just 2 grades. I teach 350 students every day. So I teach in a very, very large program at a school that I just helped open a couple of years ago.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. What grade do they start string instruction in your school district?
Start in 6th grade. So I am the person going out and doing all the to all the elementaries, and I get my numbers by doing that.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. So that's such an exciting time when you are part of their first instruction
Right.
to really
I
get
think
them
it's
into it.
really fun to do beginners.
Yeah, it is. It's like the most important too, right? If you don't do your job well, there is no high school orchestra. Yeah, love it.
Well, I know today we wanted to talk about student driven assessments, but maybe you could start with what is that, and maybe how it's different from a traditional assessment.
Okay, so for me, a student-driven assessment means I'm giving students more of the ownership on the assessment process. So in a traditional assessment, and what I did for years and years and years, because it's how I was raised, and it's how I did it when I was student teaching, and it's how I saw everyone do it, was students submit a playing test, either on a video, because we have technology now. So I've done it with the videos in Canvas. I did it with Flipgrid. I did it with Seesaw. We did it in class with assessments. And so many ways to do it traditionally. And then I hand the students a grade. Even my administrator once came on a playing test day to observe me. And I was like, "Are you sure you want to stay today? We're having a playing test." And he was like, "Oh, yo, this is great. I want to see how you do this." He sat and listened for the full 45, 50 minutes of me listening to every one of my students one by one while they were waiting for their turn doing music theory sort of worksheets, right? That were really long. So it would take them a really long time, so they would be good the whole time. So that worksheet was really designed just to take them forever, right? And I would listen to every single kid, and I would handwrite comments on this rubric, this assessment that I had, and I would pass it back to each kid, and they'd even reflect on it, and they'd write on it. The administrator was like, "Wow, like that was amazing. That was the best thing ever. You're such a great teacher." And then and so for years, I thought that was just the best way to do things. But, looking at the trash can on my way out of school, that trash can with my traditional assessment papers, it was full of my comments. It was full of those papers. That assessment was like, it was one and done. And it was like, did they get their 20 points or whatever? If they got 18 or 15 out of 20, I noticed for a lot of kids, that was good enough. Like, they got their score. The same kid would always do well. The ones I would expect, it got to the point where I could predict scores. Like I wouldn't have to hear them because they started to have a history of just getting the same types of scores. So to me, the traditional way of assessing, it wasn't working for me. So I started to seek out ways that I could make it more meaningful and relevant to my students. So I started experimenting with all sorts of new ways to do it, which has led to the student-driven assessments.
Yeah. What you're saying is resonating with me so much. I think back to when I would do the playing tests on Canvas with my middle school students, and they'd say, "Why did I get the score?" So, well, did you look at the comments? No. And like you said, they would never even look at it to see what I had told them. And the thought of like improving those specific things never even crossed their mind. Right. Because like you said, I did my playing test. Check. One and done. Like I did it. Done. So yeah, that what you're saying, I definitely have seen that in my own students.
Yeah. I've also heard a lot of people say too, as soon as you put that number on there is no further reading. They see 18 out of 20. Okay, whatever, I passed. It's good, right? Like the number just stops everything for kids.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, what do we do about it? What did you learn?
Well, what I found out was that students were playing for a grade. And they didn't really care if they were missing some points. So it became less about the learning cases and more about, well, what grade did I get? Which wasn't what I wanted the focus to be. I wanted the focus to be on the learning and the progress. I found that traditional playing tests were not motivating for certain students. And it was taking so long to grade that honestly, I would burn out if I had to go home and listen to 6 hours of playing tests.
Yeah, that's real.
Not just about the student, it's about me coming to a place in my job that I can manage the load of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
When it comes to it. And what I learned is that having student-driven assessments where students are really doing the assessing and doing their feedback and giving each other feedback is that it freed me up to spend time on to explore what worked best for my students. I have more time. Instead of grading 6 hours of playing tests, I have time to be creating helpful content based on what they're giving me in class, based on these assessments we're doing. I've learned that students learn at different rates, and that's okay, which you don't always get on a traditional playing test. Like if a kid doesn't have it the first time, now that's okay. And they know that the journey's not over, that we're going to keep working on that.
Yeah.
So we're meeting the needs of individual students. And then I think it changes the climate and tone of the classroom. So before, maybe it's about competition, like who's doing the best, who sounds the best. And now it's more about students helping each other. Students easily volunteer to share their playing. They're welcome to have feedback. They know it's about everybody learning and not about who's best or who has the better grade. So it's about embracing mistakes and working together to overcome and improve. And so I just feel like students now have more ownership of their progress and their playing. And that's really how it's shaped and molded my class now. So I think there's a lot of just great benefits.
Yeah. I mean, I immediately, that just hearing those kinds of things, that makes me think then if I go and practice, I, as a learner, as a student, know like where my strengths are. I don't need to wait for, Mrs. Harman to tell me what to do or tell me how I'm doing. Like I know I've been reflecting on my strengths and where I need to practice. So it just kind of empowers them in that learning space, in the practice space too.
Right, exactly. I mean, how many times do students go practice and they come back and who knows what they were practicing or what was wrong with it? But the more they practice assessing themselves and each other, the more they're going to be able to practice more effectively because they know what to look for.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah. And it's just reminding me of so many different things and various people we've talked to. You're talking about making mistakes and how that's an okay thing. And you're talking about the fact that it's the progress, it's not the grade. And I think that's what's missing sometimes. And I wonder, I have mixed feelings about grades and how they work, but this idea that every student is so different and so unique, we have to think about how are we assigning grades in a way that's showing their growth, their individual and personal growth, and not their comparison of themselves to another student. Right.
I have had to rethink how I do grades. And I feel like when I first posted this idea on my social media, I did feel just slightly attacked.
Oh, sure.
We're like, well, what about grades? Well, what about the grade? And that was not my highest priority as I was implementing this. I don't really care what their grade is. So I give every one of my students a grade just for doing the assessment. Because as soon as I start giving them grades based on what they give each other, I have let the freedom to be honest and reflective. That's going to go out the window, and they're going to be so worried about what to give each other or what their grade's going to be in the end. I have to make sure my space is safe to be reflective, which means I have to let go of the grading. I can't always just be like, well, what grade did you get about everything? So I am grading a lot on participation and effort in doing the assessment instead of what you get on the assessment.
Yeah. But I think that's really valuable because, again, we're showing that progress and growth is the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Not that, we're going to give you a grade based on this one exact moment in time and that's your grade and we're done. Right. So I think you're shifting the focus, which in music, which is so highly individualized, is necessary. Yeah. I'm kind of curious. So you mentioned that your principal came in when you were doing playing tests the other way and was like, oh, this is amazing. Have you mentioned your shift in process and what kind of reaction have you gotten?
I have not, because that principal, I've gone through so many principals.
That's fair. Yeah.
He retired long ago, and I still consider him just a really valuable mentor. He really taught me a ton about checking for understanding, and he truly made me a better teacher. But I just feel like that was probably 10 years ago or more, 10, 13, 14 years.
Yeah, that's fair.
I feel like education's come a ways since then. I don't know if my admins know what I do.
Very common, right?
The music room's at the far end of the school.
Yep. Nothing's on fire. She's doing good. Yeah. So can you describe what is this like? What does it look like? Can you walk us through like an example in one of your classes and kind of what you tell the students, what they do, all the good details?
Pull up some examples. Well, there's so many ways to do it, and I find myself not always doing this the same way, but maybe
That's
the
fair.
structure is the same. But it really depends on what I want my students to master.
Mm-hmm.
So there's tons of different activities. I'm trying to look at some examples I've done. Just this last week, I did an activity called Choose Your Own Assessment. My students started their own new music, and we started on the hardest parts to play, and it was a lot of rehearsal time that was spent in just extreme focus and trying to master these new skills. And after a few days of this, I realized my students just need some space to now let that settle. They need some time to be practicing that again, and I need to give them time to work on what was hardest for them. I spent all this time structured rehearsal, this part, now this part, now this measure. Like, they need time to go back and do what they individually need now.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of this choose their own assessment was they choose the eight or so measures that they needed to work on the most. They practiced those 8 measures. I had a timer. We're going to practice those in class for 10 minutes, and I could walk around and help as needed. And that's free practice time in class. And then they play that for their stand partner. And I did have a rubric. Well, and my rubrics are quite simple. Like, it says where the notes played with accurate fingering, and it will say either always, sometimes, or I either use the word never or not yet. I like not yet the best.
Yeah, I like that.
Really simple. Where the notes played in tune, was the rhythm performed correctly, was the bowing correct, and the stand partner just quickly circles a 3 or 2 or 1. And because I've established this culture, they're quite honest with each other, because they're not scared that if they circle a 1, that kid's going to get a bad grade. They're not worried about that. So they're very willing to give honest feedback. And what I find is they do these stand partner assessments, which takes 5 minutes or less. Now compare that to a playing test, which takes 5 minutes or less. They have given each other feedback, and often, without me even saying anything, they're showing each other how to fix things, which to me is huge. I'm teaching big classes of 60 kids each. So I don't have the capacity to reach every kid one-on-one, but they're giving each other the one-on-one. And then after that's done, so 5 minutes of evaluating each other and listening to each other, then they go back and they answer questions for a self-reflection, like, what are you doing well? What do you need to work on? What strategies will you use to improve? And then the last question is, do you need help? So that if there is a student that's like, oh, I don't know if I even am getting this right. Maybe the feedback from the stand partner, they're not sure what it means, or if the stand partner was even right. Then I can go back if needed and reach out to those kids. They have a way to reach out to me.
Yeah.
That's one sample. That's just one activity out of so many activities that are possible. The same structure.
Yeah. There's 2 things that really stood out to me. And they're both like passing things that you said. The first one was that this is not like free reign all of the time. You mentioned that you had some very structured rehearsals first, right? I think there's a misconception that when we talk about student ownership, that means that the students always have ownership over everything and we just sit back and let it happen. And that's not the case. Like, your expertise as the orchestra director is still very necessary. And there are definitely still moments where you are running these rehearsals. So I think that's really, really valuable to point out. And then you also said you have 60 people in a class, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing I've often heard. It's like, oh, well, my classes are too big. Too many students. We can't do that. But you're making that happen in large classes, so it can be done.
Right, and it makes my life easier. And I should say, what was I trying to think? I was going to say, the thing that moves me the most when I do this is I'll stand sometimes in the back of the room and I'll just be watching the students do these activities together. Yeah. And I haven't cried, but I've been moved. Like, this is so amazing. Why doesn't everybody do this? They're helping each other. There's this collaborative culture and climate going on. They're improved. And then at the end of this particular activity, which took 20 or 30 minutes of rehearsal time, I said, now raise your hand if you feel like you really improved today. You made some real progress. I mean, every hand's going up. Every
Yeah.
hand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is amazing because it's so the kids are so invested, right?
Yeah.
And so invested in the process. So something I know I want to go back to is like, how do you cultivate that environment of for how do you get them to have this peer feedback that's so meaningful and beneficial to each other? So is there a way you build that?
I think you have to practice it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So especially when I first started doing peer sort of assessments, I would go through each question and practice with the student. And maybe even have a volunteer to practice doing it for me. I'll say, will someone like to play for me? And I will fill this out. Let's discuss what we would circle here. And then I always give a lecture about, now what if we're evaluating your best friend and you really want them, sorry about the duck, you're evaluating your best friend and you really want them to feel good about themselves. So you think, I'll just let them have it. I'm just going to give them the treat. What is that going to do for them in the future? Are they going to feel like they need to improve? What does that do for their progress? And we have discussions like that. And they're like, oh yeah, like that wouldn't be a good idea. If I really want to help my friend get better, then I need to make sure I give good feedback and accurate feedback. And we talk about all those things.
Yeah. It's reminding me, we talked to Tracy Maguire and Katie Labrie. Oh goodness, it's probably been a while now, but they talked a lot about teaching kids to practice, and they used a lot of the similar things that you're mentioning about how you have to practice it with the students. You have to like go through those practice strategies out loud, almost like, this is how I'm doing this. This is how I'm thinking about this step. And it's such a great reminder that we can't just throw it to them. We can't just say, okay, evaluate your stand partner. We really do have to build, and we have to build those skills, right? Students don't inherently know how to give each other feedback, but you're helping them cultivate those skills.
Right.
Yeah. That's neat. Are there any other strategies, or actually before we get to that, the example that you just mentioned, can I just ask, which grade was that, 6th or 7th?
I did that in 7th grade. So that would be my Orchestra 2 class.
Okay. So in theory, this is their 2nd year playing their instruments.
Right. Correct.
Did you do this with your 6th graders as well after building up to it, or not?
Sure. Once they knew they had a good handle on their music, once they knew their music pretty well, I think that's a good time. I probably wouldn't give it to them as early as I have my Orchestra 2 kids.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think they could handle like that.
Neat. What's another kind of, like you said that one was called choose your own assessment. What's another example?
Let's see. I'm just going to have a quick look. Another example would be where I create a document that has little snippets from our concert music, maybe up to 2 measures at a time, and they just play it straight from the assessment paper for their stand partner. And again, I like to do a very simple rubrics, because if it's too complex, the student is not going to understand it or know exactly what to mark. I want it to be so easy to mark that everyone could understand how, and everyone knows what it means. So I'll have a really easy assessment, maybe with 4 passages, and then the stand partner just has a checkbox to check. One of them is like, yes, I play in tune, or the next one is, I almost have it. The other one is that I need help. And then it always has a reflection piece. So we'll say, in order to master this passage, I will fill in the blank. Or it says, here's what I'm struggling with, blank. It's kind of another example. So students are getting feedback, but then they're also making a plan for improving. But I could do this for individual skills as well. So like I just taught slurs to my beginners, and I gave them a worksheet where they practice drawing slurs and they define what a slur is. And then at the end, they play a passage and they rate their own performance. So sometimes they have their stand partner assess them, but sometimes I let them assess themselves. And that's valuable to me because I can quickly glance at this paper and say, oh, this kid's feeling really confident with this skill. I can say, oh, these kids, they're going to need my help and I need to revisit this. So it's giving me feedback on my lesson planning and my rehearsal for the future coming days. It is going to it's planning my rehearsal, my warm-ups for me, really, based on that feedback.
Yeah, that sounds like that assessment, for instruction, right? Like it tells you exactly what you need to do for the next couple of lessons, which is great. Do you, I heard you say it was paper, and so that must work for you to do it in paper. But I'm also thinking for people who are one-to-one iPads or things like that, like I could see that easily being like a Google form where then it all comes back to you and you can keep it digitally too.
Yeah, I've always wanted to implement something like a Google form where they just track themselves, because with a form you can put it in a spreadsheet and they can start tracking progress.
Yeah.
And seeing progress. For me, it would take so long for them to just log in. I
Yeah.
can't fix them about 10 minutes just to open it up and log it in. But I have done things with technology instead of paper. For example, I'll have them practice along with the recording and evaluate that experience, or I'll have them play a video in Canvas, just like a regular playing test, but they listen to it themselves.
Yeah.
They could go through and evaluate their own playing themselves, watching themselves back.
Mm-hmm. That's always fun, getting them to watch their videos. Because you see things that you didn't realize was happening. Yeah. So if you could summarize, what are some of the benefits that you've seen for your students? You mentioned that this is definitely a time saver for you, which we all need those, but how would you summarize the benefits to the students themselves?
I think the benefit is students are understanding more frequently what they need to be working on and what they need to do to fix it. Because they've had practice looking for certain skills, especially things that we're passing off and doing in class, they can tell you. I can ask them, what would you give me on this? I mean, they all know exactly. They've had the practice. And so I just think that makes you a better player. It makes it easier for you to learn when you are self-reflective to fix things. Because as a teacher, even with a smaller class, you can't hear every kid at once. So they do have to start taking on some of that capacity to evaluate themselves consistently as they're playing or to improve.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of just musical independence in what you're saying.
Totally.
And that's a huge goal, is that we want them to be able to do this without us.
I also heard I'm not a passive participant in the ensemble. I'm an active listener, because I know she's going to ask me these things. And so I'm just getting used to just being an active member, right? That's listening and reflective. So
it's also a climate for just a rehearsal space. Like I could need to fix something on the violin side, and I could say, now viola, cello, bass, I want you to watch for this, this, and this, and this, and give me a thumb scale on how they do on this certain thing I want you to watch for. And everybody's engaged. I really try hard to never be the point of, you sit here for 5 minutes while I go fix this. But when they're practicing evaluating, being involved that way, it's making them up. They realize that everything affects them, and the listening is part of learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And part of being a good musician. Yeah, for sure.
Well, if people are listening right now, I'm sure they're getting some great ideas, but what would you maybe suggest as a thing to try tomorrow?
So I would suggest you could start small. For example, I think you can hear immediate improvement in any rehearsal by just tasking students with a specific thing to watch for in their stand partner and give them 1 minute. Say, I want you to check your stand partner on this measure, check to see if all of the F naturals match, or see if they're playing the F natural with the correct fingering. Everyone check your stand partner. You have 1 minute to check each other. I can't tell you what a difference that makes in my rehearsals. Instead of being like, come on, guys, it's low 2. It's F natural. What are we doing? Why are we still fixing this? I could just be like, I'm going to give you 1 minute. You're going to check your stand partner and make sure their fingering's right on this passage. Go. 1 minute. It's better. So these are strategies. Even if you don't have the paper, you can make those happen in rehearsal right then.
Yes, that's great. Because so often whoever's not doing the low 2 just doesn't know.
Yeah.
They hear you saying and they're like, ooh. Yeah.
It only takes a minute.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Yeah. And that's easy to implement. And you can even think about that in anything, right?
Yeah.
Catherine, I'm picturing recorders, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
1 minute. Take a notice if your friend is covering the tone holes all the way.
Right.
Right. And same thing in band, all of those things. It's
right.
It's very easily transferable.
Right. Show the person next to you your chord C on the ukulele and your chord F. Do they look the same? Like that's, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so easy to do. It's such good practice for them and awareness for them of what to look for, because how many of them honestly correct themselves just in the act of checking somebody else?
Exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
that's a good one. Yeah. I love things that are just immediately you can implement. That's great. Well, if people are interested in in all of the things that you do, how could they connect with you and learn some more about your work?
I have a website. It's www.orchestraclassroom.com. From there are a few links. That links directly to my blog, which is a different website, but orchestraclassroom.com does link to some of my other websites that I have. So my blog is orchestrateacher.blogspot.com. Mm-hmm. And I try and post ideas and strategies that I've tried in my own classroom. And I do have a Teachers Pay Teachers site and a store at orchestraclassroom.com. But all of the links are there in the website. Social media, I post ideas, lots of times a week. I would say multiple times a week I'm posting resources and assessment ideas, things that I've been doing in my classroom. And that is on Instagram, orchestra.teacher.life.
Awesome. Yes. And that is where we saw you posting about these assessments. And again, I can give another thumbs up to the website because, as I said, that's what I found all those years ago when I was trying to figure out this orchestra thing. So it's a lot of valuable tips on there.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. We know that our listeners will as well. So thank you. And have a good rest of the day.
Thanks. You too.
If you liked today's episode, you will love the PassTheBatonBook.com website, where you can find free resources, coaching services, and how to support Pass the Baton. Speaking of support, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. Thanks again for listening.